Angela Marks was known for her discipline. Nathan Reddick was known for nothing at all, until the day she vanished, and he became the center of a blood-soaked nightmare that left police searching for her severed body parts in a backyard pool. This single moment would unravel a story of obsession, silence, and a horrifying secret hiding in plain sight. Angela Marks had always been the dependable one. Every morning, at precisely 6:45 a.m., she left her two-bedroom home on Bramblewood Drive, walked 3 blocks to her small yoga studio, and unlocked the doors before any of her students arrived. She didn't take days off. She didn't sleep in. She didn't vanish. But on that cloudy Monday morning, something was off. Her neighbor, a retired schoolteacher named Evelyn Clark, noticed it first. Angela's front door was wide open, swinging slightly in the wind. Evelyn thought maybe Angela had gone out quickly and forgotten to shut it. Still, something about the stillness made her uneasy. She called out, but there was no response. Evelyn eventually called the police. Uneasy, but still hopeful, it was nothing. When the responding officer arrived, he stepped inside cautiously. What he found silenced that hope immediately. The hallway just inside the front door was slick with blood. Thick streaks of it painted the hardwood floor, trailing toward the living room and down into the kitchen. Bloody footprints, bare and uneven, suggested someone had been dragging something heavy. The air was heavy with the smell of iron and rot, and even the officer, trained for scenes like this, had to pause. The living room looked untouched at first. Pillows were still on the couch, a yoga mat was rolled beside the coffee table, and her tea mug sat on a coaster. But the blood told another story. It had seeped underneath the couch, pooled behind the armchair, and splashed onto the pale blue walls. There was no forced entry, no shattered glass, no overturned furniture. It was as if someone had entered peacefully, and then unleashed a nightmare. Crime scene technicians were called in immediately. The house was sealed off. As detectives began to document the scene, they noticed something chilling. There was no body, not even a piece of one. The amount of blood suggested a fatal injury, possibly more than one. But Angela was simply gone. The home was soaked in evidence of a brutal act, but no victim remained to speak of it. Forensics began their grim task, measuring blood spatter, swabbing walls, collecting fingerprints. The scene gave up its secrets slowly. A pair of Angela's slippers was found near the door, one upright, the other lying sideways in a puddle of blood. Her phone was gone. Her handbag was still in the kitchen, contents undisturbed. Groceries she had bought the day before were still sitting on the counter, as if she had never gotten the chance to put them away. The police had no clear suspects, no witnesses, and no sign of Angela's whereabouts. All they had was a house filled with blood, a missing woman, and a sickening feeling that something far worse lay just beneath the surface, something that hadn't finished revealing itself yet. And though they didn't know it then, the backyard pool would soon become the key to unraveling the horror they had just begun to uncover. The house had already told a terrible story, but the trail didn't end inside. As investigators stepped into the backyard, the stillness felt heavier. The garden was tidy, the patio furniture untouched, but something about the atmosphere was wrong. Too quiet, too staged. A canvas tarp was draped across the pool, weighed down at the corners by small bricks. It didn't look like it belonged there. Angela wasn't the type to leave things half-covered, especially not her perfectly maintained pool. The tarp was damp and streaked with what looked like rust, but closer inspection revealed something darker, It was blood. The corners soaked it in like cloth. As officers pulled the tarp back, the smell hit them first. A rancid metallic stench that rose from the water like steam. The pool was no longer clear. Instead, it was a cloudy greenish-red mess. Bits of debris floated on the surface. Some of it looked like leaves, but other pieces were unmistakably biological. Clumps of something gelatinous, too thick to be algae, clung to the edges of the tile. That's when they called in the dive team. 2 forensic divers suited up and slowly entered the water. Visibility was near zero. Every movement stirred up more of the foul mixture. But even with limited sight, they felt what was hidden. Tangled in the pool's filter system were human remains, starting with a severed arm. It had been stripped of jewelry, but bore a small lotus tattoo on the wrist, one Angela was known for. A second arm followed, caught beneath the pool ladder, its fingers curled and stiff. Each discovery was worse than the last. By the time the divers had finished, they had recovered 4 major body parts, 2 arms and 2 legs, each cut with chilling precision. Weighted with bricks and tied with heavy string, the limbs had been deliberately placed to stay submerged. Only one piece of Angela's body was still unaccounted for, her torso, and most disturbing of all, her head. The search continued for hours. Drones flew overhead. Canines searched the yard's perimeter. Forensics catalogued every trace of blood from the kitchen door to the back patio. Then, just before dusk, the final piece surfaced. Lodged in the pool cover mechanism was a plastic-wrapped bundle. Inside was Angela's torso, naked, bruised, and sealed in multiple layers of industrial-grade plastic wrap and duct tape. Whoever had done this wanted it hidden, but not buried. It was as though the killer had wanted the body to be found, but in pieces, in a grotesque display. News of the gruesome discovery spread quickly. What was once a missing person case had become a homicide, a particularly brutal one. Detectives began to suspect the killer had knowledge of anatomy, or at least had done research. The cuts were clean, the wrapping meticulous. There was no rage in the dismemberment, only intent. But the pool, for all its horror, still left one question unanswered. Who would do this to Angela Marks? And how had they managed to turn a quiet suburban backyard into a watery grave without anyone noticing? With Angela's dismembered body recovered and the scene now clearly a calculated murder, investigators shifted their focus to uncovering who could have carried out such a precise and horrifying crime. There were no signs of forced entry, no defensive wounds on the recovered remains, and no eyewitnesses who had seen or heard anything unusual in the neighborhood that night. But technology, as it often does, began to fill in the gaps. Detectives began by pulling Angela's phone records, hoping for a clue, anything to point them towards someone with motive or opportunity. What they found was disturbing. Over the last 2 months, Angela had received hundreds of text messages from an unregistered burner phone. The messages ranged from seemingly innocent compliments to increasingly disturbing phrases about fate, rejection, and punishment. Many of the messages had been deleted, but the ones recovered revealed an escalating obsession. The sender never signed a name, and the number had no registration information, but it pinged off the same 3 cell towers. Each time, towers located near Angela's yoga studio, her home, and a grocery store she frequently visited. Whoever had sent the messages had been watching her closely, tracking her movements, and inserting themselves into the background of her daily life. Next, police canvassed the neighborhood again, this time asking about any suspicious activity or unknown vehicles. One elderly neighbor recalled seeing someone in a hoodie walking down the street late the night Angela disappeared. She didn't think much of it at the time, just a passerby. But a check of nearby security cameras proved useful. A doorbell camera on a house across the street had captured brief, grainy footage of a figure moving in and out of Angela's front door in the early morning hours. The person carried several large plastic storage bins, slowly loading them into the trunk of a dark sedan. Though the footage was unclear, it was enough to run a partial plate. The car was traced to a 35-year-old man named Nathan Reddick. Nathan wasn't a friend or co-worker of Angela's, nor a recent contact in her phone. But when detectives cross-checked her client records at the yoga studio, they found his name. He had been a student in her beginner's class over a year ago. Quiet, introverted, often lingering after class but rarely speaking. Then, about 6 months earlier, he had stopped coming. There was nothing remarkable about him on paper. No criminal record, no restraining orders, no history of violence. When police questioned Nathan at his small rental home on the edge of town, he appeared calm, even helpful. He said he hadn't spoken to Angela in over a year and barely remembered her. But his demeanor shifted when asked about his car. He insisted he hadn't driven it the night she disappeared. Yet his story didn't. Hold, a warrant was issued, and what they found inside would solidify him as the prime suspect. Nathan Reddick had lived in the shadows of Angela's life, always watching, always waiting. And now, police were beginning to see how that shadow had turned deadly. When investigators entered Nathan Reddick's home with a warrant, they expected to find something. A trace of blood, maybe a burner phone, perhaps receipts or clothing linked to the crime. What they uncovered went far beyond their expectations. His house, at first glance, was clean and sterile. Too clean. The floors had been recently mopped, the trash had been taken out, and every surface seemed scrubbed. But behind the layers of order was something far darker. In the garage, police found a workbench covered with tools. Ordinary in appearance, but several bore microscopic traces of blood, later confirmed to be Angela's. A hacksaw with a partially rusted blade had dried tissue still caught in its teeth. Latex gloves, garbage bags, and a bottle of industrial-strength cleaner were stuffed into a cabinet underneath. None of these items looked new. They had been used. Carefully. Repeatedly. In a black trash bag in the corner of the garage was a crushed smartphone. Although the screen was shattered and the casing damaged, tech experts were able to confirm it was Angela's missing phone. Her fingerprint was still on the home button. It had been powered down deliberately and the SIM card was missing. When asked again about his connection to her, Nathan said it must have been a coincidence, that someone must have planted it, but the worst was still waiting in the basement. Beneath the floorboards of the laundry room was a small, padlocked door leading to an old root cellar. The air inside was bitterly cold. Officers found an upright freezer pushed against the back wall, half buried under piles of clothing and bags of frozen vegetables. The outside of the appliance was clean. The inside was not. As they peeled back, the layers of frozen goods, a black plastic bag was found wedged at the bottom. Inside it was another bag, and inside that, something wrapped in thick layers of duct tape and more plastic. When the last layer was removed, investigators froze. It was Angela's head. Her features were contorted in terror. The lips were slightly parted, her eyes half open. Forensic analysis would later reveal she had likely been alive through much of her ordeal. The sight of her, stored like frozen meat, affected even the most experienced officers. Nathan was arrested immediately. He didn't resist. He said nothing. He showed no reaction, no fear, no remorse. He simply watched as they led him away. The media erupted. A man who barely appeared in anyone's memory had committed a murder so vile it paralyzed the entire community. Neighbors were shocked. He was the quiet guy who kept to himself. Never loud, never threatening. A background character in the story of the town. But inside his home was a different reality, one of obsession, control, and madness, and the freezer had become his secret shrine, preserving not only a trophy of his crime, but proof that the danger Angela faced had been growing for far longer than anyone had realized. As Nathan Reddick sat in a jail cell awaiting trial, investigators continued combing through the mountains of evidence gathered from his home. Among the most chilling discoveries was not a weapon or physical item, but a series of encrypted files stored in his cloud backup account. After weeks of decoding and analysis, authorities unlocked a digital archive Nathan had named The Path. Inside was a manifesto. It was a document of nearly 200 pages, handwritten, scanned, and meticulously organized into folders by date. The writings revealed a deeply disturbed mind spiraling into obsession. Nathan had documented everything: his thoughts, his fantasies, his surveillance routines, and eventually, his plans. He believed Angela had been sent to him as a sign from the universe. He described her voice, her movements, even her scent in unnerving detail. He wrote about her yoga classes as if they were sacred rituals, and her simple gestures, smiling at a student, handing out mats, were interpreted as personal messages to him. But when she didn't acknowledge him beyond casual politeness, his tone shifted. In one passage, he wrote, "She resists the bond that was written in the stars. Her blindness will cost her." Nathan began referring to Angela not as a person, but as a vessel, a subject, a sacrifice. The writing became more erratic as time went on. He began planning her murder with the same calm tone he once used to describe her kindness. There were lists, tools to buy, chemicals to clean with, ways to dismember a body without damaging bones. He had sketched the layout of her home from memory. He knew where she kept her keys, where her bedroom window faced, and even the time she usually showered. In one diagram, he marked the pool with the words, "Final Purification." The prosecution would use the manifesto as a central pillar in the case. During the trial, Nathan sat still, emotionless, as prosecutors read excerpts aloud. Jurors were shown the freezer photos, the bins, the text message logs, but it was the manifesto that painted the clearest picture, not just of guilt, but of motive. Nathan hadn't killed in anger. He had killed with purpose. Psychologists described his behavior as delusional fixation turned homicidal. He wasn't insane, they said. He was controlled, calculated. A man who had convinced himself that murder was destiny. The defense attempted to argue mental illness, but the jury wasn't swayed. Nathan's precise planning, his efforts to erase digital footprints, and the cold preservation of his victim were not the acts of someone who had lost touch with reality. They were the actions of someone who had simply chosen to ignore it. The trial lasted only 3 weeks. The verdict took 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Angela's family never got the closure of a motive that made sense. There was no connection, no affair, no feud. Just a woman living her life and a man who believed he owned it. In the end, Angela's story became a haunting reminder that sometimes the most terrifying killers are the ones you never even notice, until it's far too late.